Throughout playing Fear and Hunger 2, there is a secret god that is alluded to that many players may not have picked up on. That is the Sulfur God. There are many gods, both old and new, in Fear and Hunger. However, the Sulfur God is teased throughout the game, yet only gets revealed to be a force at the end of the game, which is revealed by Percolate. But who is this god? And what are its motives and ideology? In this video, I will go over the lore of this obscure deity, but before we get into that, please leave a like and sub to this channel if you want to see more Fear and Hunger lore videos. With that out of the way, let's look into the Sulfur God. When playing Fear and Hunger 2, you are exposed to Rare and its influence, and the influence of old gods as front and center to the story. Rare is turning the town of Prehevel mad, the Bremen army and the Eastern Union is in conflict, and the old gods are fighting over the influence of mortals. However, there are clues throughout the game that there may be more going on. Throughout the playthrough, you will be continuously accosted by various monstrosities with faces painted blue. The very first enemy you fight in the intro, named the Janitor, is one of these monstrosities that have a face that is painted blue. This abomination attacks us with a bladed weapon. Who exactly is this guy? I'll reveal later. As the game progresses, you will encounter another example of these blue-faced enemies, named Needles. Needles will actively try and hunt you down, as well as any other contestants. When walking throughout the streets of Prehevel, he will find you and sprint towards you. This clown-like figure uses various medical instruments to harm you, by injecting you with various poisons and as well using the horrific needle whip, which he attacks you, causing bleeding damage. His use of chemical compounds is what makes him so dangerous. But who exactly is this guy? If you are playing as Dan, he will recount how Needle's face looks familiar. If you inspect the corpse after beating him, he will freeze as he actually recognizes the face of this man. It's his stepfather, Baron Einar von Dutch. Dan used to work for him as well as dating his daughter, which later became his fiancée. The Baron was known for his unconventional use of medicine for treating patients, and had a deep interest in the old god Sylvian. However, his interest in the occult and the old god Sylvian wasn't the end of it. The Baron became infatuated with a different god called the Sulfur God. One day, the Baron was found dead after killing his fiancée Elise. It was then that Dan found out this ritual was done in the name of the mysterious entity named the Sulfur God. And according to Dan, this was the last he saw of him. So you can imagine the shock of encountering him as Needles in Prehevel today. As the player reaches the midway point of the game, the player seeks out an effigy located at some apartment complex in Prehevel. Upon entering, the door locks behind them, and they are trapped within the building. There's something quite strange about these apartments, however, and it becomes very quickly apparent that something very wrong has occurred here. All of the walls and furniture is caked in this solid wax-like mold. Everything in this apartment complex is stained with this strange substance. What on earth is this stuff, and where did it come from? To make things even stranger, there is almost a supernatural silence which fills the building, almost as if it is cut off from the outside world. The player explores more of the apartments until they fall down a room with a strange symbol painted on the floor. The symbol is unlike any of the sigils of the gods that the player has learned of up until this point. None of the old gods have this as their symbol. So what is this? In the middle of this strange symbol lies a diary which contains strange and barely legible writing. It journals how the author killed various of the inhabitants of the apartment, and that he did it in the name of Sulf something. After that, the writing becomes illegible. Now, I have a theory as to who actually wrote this diary. I believe this is a journal of the janitor that we encountered at the start of the game. In this room, the player can find Dan. Dan is sitting on a chair and looking depressed, just brooding. Asking him about the symbol and what he knows, Dan reveals that he actually knows something about this. Dan recognizes this symbol to be that of the Sulfur God. Darn knows what this madman in the diary is referencing. However, he doesn't feel comfortable explaining it to the player as of yet. In a playthrough of Fear and Hunger 2, this is perhaps the biggest telltale sign that something more is going on beyond just the old gods in Primeval. There is a third party at work here. There are other references to the Sulfur God. In the museum where you encounter various party attenders, there is one of the guests that claims it is definitely the month of sulfur, and a lot of the local customs of the people of Primeval is very reminiscent of sulfur rituals. You can encounter another one of the sulfur cultists by going into Tunnel 1. You can see traces of someone that has been at work by sewing up various bodies in a parody of the human form. The sojobs that you have encountered seem to have been created here. You can also encounter the living flesh, an abomination of the human form that is wandering around these tunnels. By fighting it, the artist that has made these creatures comes into vision. A woman named Stitches, who has various pieces of flesh, presumably other bodies that has been sewn on top of her, and shares the blue face paint that we've seen with Needles and the janitor. This seems to be the creator of various abominations that we've encountered, such as the Sojobs. Stitches takes apart humans and crafts them into twisted parodies of the human form. One of the worst examples of this being a human centipede-like creation. Upon defeating Stitches, when taking a closer look at her, Dawn realizes something off. The face of Stitches looks familiar. It resembles Elise, Dawn's fiancée, who was also killed in the Sulfur God ritual by Baron Einar von Dutch, also known as Needles. Apparently this Sulfur God ritual has brought these two back to life, but in a depraved, monstrous form. As the final day of the Festival of Termina arrives and the player comes to the tower alone, Perkele reveals that his true allegiance was to the Sulfur God and not Rare like he claimed at the start. Taking Perkele on his word, he was merely using the moon scorching of Rare for his own ends in achieving bloodshed for the Sulfur God. When the player goes to Perkele with all contestants killed before day 3, he will commend us on our bloodthirst and offer to induct us into the Cult of Sulfur, explaining how the cult has a goal which is to maximize as much pain and suffering in the world as possible. If you take him up on this offer, you will have to defeat him in combat as a final test. What exactly is the ideology of the Cult of Sulfur? The Cult of Sulfur believes in unshackling all of the rules and moral considerations for the sake of indulging in the most depraved form of hedonism. To become a Sulfur cultist is to seek pleasure at the expense of all else, and this goes hand in hand with the mindless destruction and cruelty just for the sake of it. After defeating Perkele, we are then sent to the Sulfur Pit to burn until all of our weakness is removed from our soul. And we even get a glimpse of the Sulfur God, but the Sulfur God doesn't look strong. In fact, seeing the Sulfur God, he looks to be in a pitiful state, as opposed to all of the other gods which are represented with powerful and imposing avatars. The Sulfur God is seemingly in a torturous existence, with no limbs or seemingly any way to perceive or enjoy the world. The Sulfur God appears to be just a block of burned and scarred flesh, with the only way that the Sulfur God can get any sensation is a single tongue poking out of a hole. This is the pitiful reality of the Sulfur God, a torturous existence in complete darkness, living in an eternity of pain and suffering, with no way to interact with reality. Truly a fate worse than death. This is quite a subversion of expectations, as the Sulfur God is made to be the other side of Almer, a stand-in for the devil which is depicted as an overpowering force, but the Sulfur God looks profoundly weak and pitiful. This may explain why the Sulfur God seeks to destroy and cause pain in people, to ruin things for the sake of it. It's just resentful at everything, and wants everything and anything to burn and suffer like it is. Unlike the other gods of Fear and Hunger who are trying to build a new world in accordance to their ideas and concepts, the Sulfur God just wants to take everything else down with it. The Sulfur God doesn't want to win you over to create some new world or regime. It's simply the manifestation of the idea that if I must suffer, so too shall everybody else. His servants embody this idea, who are theorized to have spent time in the sulfur pit alongside the Sulfur God, to which they are reborn into the material world once again, indulging in the most darkest depravity and hedonism possible. The servants of the Sulfur God seem to take active pleasure in dismantling what the world has to offer. You can see this in the way that they attack contestants. They're enjoying this. They are pursuing pleasure. So much so that even Percolate can't help but attack you when you do exactly what he wanted and deems you worthy to join the Sulfur Cult. The Sulfur Cultists just like causing suffering that much. It's worth mentioning that the blue face paint that can be found on the Sulfur Cultists could be a reference to them burning in the sulfur pit, which stains their face blue. Perhaps it's not merely paint, but it's a permanent stain on their face, as when sulfur is ignited, it produces a blue color. It's also unclear as to the degree at which sulfur cultists retain memory of their past life before burning in the sulfur pit. One interesting and very minor interaction which I think is still noteworthy is how, when engaging with Needles while Dawn is in your party, a message will pop up saying the expression on Needles' face suddenly turns serious. Perhaps somewhere deep down Needles recognizes Dawn to some degree. It's unclear. But sulfur cultists do retain some of their memory of their past life, as the Baron was a doctor in his past life, and we see Needles using medical equipment. You can put two and two together that you don't get mind wiped after becoming a sulfur cultist. If you want to find out more about another villain in Fear and Hunger, there is another villain in Fear and Hunger named Father Hugo, which is pretty damn creepy.